everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Layla, and today our special guest is Professor Joy Leopold.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, I had a little bit research about you. When it comes to your education, you studied Louisiana State University Bachelor of Arts in Print Journalism and minor in philosophy between 2006 and 2010. And also, University of Texas at Dallas, you studied Master of Science, Innovation and Entrepreneurship 2011 and 2012. And the last, not least, University of Miami, Doctor of Philosophy, PhD Communication, Journalism and Related Program between 2014 and 2018. My first question is about, could you tell me how can you connect print journalism and philosophy? To be precise, does philosophy play a role in print journalism?
So that's a really good question. I think philosophy plays a role in print journalism, just in that a journalist might have a particular view, a philosophical view on life, and that might be reflected in the stories that they choose, how they craft their stories, who they talk to, and anything down to what they're interested in covering and how they're interested in covering it. So I think in that regard, philosophy can play a role in journalism. I know for myself, when I was in college, I studied a lot of existentialism, which is sort of a study of, like the meaning of life. Why are we here? What is all of this for? And I think that you know can be reflected in journalism. So, um, sort of taking a perspective that takes into account, these sort of views about, what is the meaning of life? What is the point, right? So one of the things, if you study existentialism, you might think, well, the point of life is to connect with others, to care for others. And so then you can think of your job as a journalist as doing that. You can say, I want to inform audiences. I want to make sure people have the information that they need to go through their lives. I want to help people find out things that are important. And so that can really help you just sort of go forward in your career in that way.
I see. Well, as if we are women, we tend to be more emotional. In that case, does philosophy help you in your career?
Well, I would say that philosophy and the study of philosophy can help you take more of like a critical eye to something. And so I think that could help you be more rational too. I think studying philosophy and then too, like the degree Doctor of Philosophy, it's sort of inherent in that is this sort of meticulous examination of stuff. And so I think that forces you to be less emotional and more rational and to sort of think about things critically, and maybe rely on data rather than, emotion. And you're looking for objective facts, not subjective information.
Thank you. Well, and also you worked as an assistant editor in Dallas, Texas, 5 months, an editorial assistant 6 months in 2010 at DS News. And also, you were the office automation assistant in 2012, only 1 year, and also freelance reporter at Dallas for weekly newspaper you assigned covering variety of topics from post-traumatic stress disorder to HIV awareness and prevention. Well, you covered mostly related to medical articles that I mentioned, and I believe you have covered articles related to other spheres. Which sphere seemed most difficult? Have you ever written critical articles?
Well, so when I was working as a journalist in Dallas, I did work for a financial magazine that was DS News. And so I thought it was pretty challenging to cover that just because I wasn't really familiar with like finance. That magazine really focuses on like the real estate market, banking, and finance. And so that's something that's completely foreign to me. And so I did find it challenging. I did have to do a lot of research to sort of understand certain things and ask people, and be really careful when interviewing people to just make sure that I got it right, so I had to
Yeah.
say, oh my gosh, can you please explain that again, or can I read back to you what I wrote so you can make sure this is right. And so that was pretty difficult, but I know a lot of it, there's a lot of, I also had to be abreast of like legislation
Mm.
around finance and stuff like that. And so I was, looking at legal documents and like things that came from the US government. And so, yeah, I think it was really challenging. And I think, previously, so like when I worked, um, for that other publication, I was just sort of like a general news, like,
Mm.
so I would get assignments about anything, right? It could have been about some event that happened, or it could have been, like you said, HIV prevention and things like that. And so
Yeah.
it was a little bit different because rather than have my whole career focused on finance and financial reporting and real estate, I could just do a quick article about something, so I wouldn't really have to do as deep of a dive into whatever that topic was, just find
Mm.
out information, talk to someone, and report it. So I think that was a little bit easier. I think generally, I mean, I think it, depending, someone might feel like it's easier to focus on a specific area and only write in that area, and then some people might think it's easier to just do general assignments. So I guess it's up to the person. But I found it easier to just write general stories and not focus so deeply on finance. Maybe if it was something else, I would.
As you told, you involved some politics, and that in that case, have you ever written that critical articles?
Yeah. So when I did, actually, yes. There is a piece of legislation that came out, a long time ago at this point.
Mhm.
And so it basically established this bureau in the United States to protect consumers. So, what happened in like 2018, or not in 2018, in 2008, there
Mhm.
was a housing market crash in the United States. And so a lot of people lost their homes, they couldn't afford to pay the mortgage. And it was because banks had practiced these predatory lending. They had basically behaved unethically, and they had given people these loans that they knew that the people would not be able to pay back. And then so a lot of people
See.
lost their houses. And so as a result of that, the government and some politicians came up with this um, federal agency that protects consumers from
Mhm.
predatory lending. It requires banks and other institutions to be very transparent and let people know, whether or not they should be taking out, a huge loan.
Yeah.
And so it changed a lot, and a lot of people were not in favor of it. And the people who I worked for, that organization, they actually were not in favor of it either, because
Mm.
they were an organization that focuses on banks. They're on the side of banks and real estate companies, real estate lenders, and things like that. And so because of that, I had to write an article that was critical of that
Yeah.
legislation, even though I personally believe that that legislation should happen. I think other people in the company did too, but because of our audience, we had to sort of toe the line between supporting it and criticizing it,
Mhm.
and acknowledging, the flaws that may have existed in the legislation, or the drawbacks that may have
Yeah.
existed. So I think it was really interesting to have to do that, because it was a challenge, because I think if I hadn't been told that I needed to write it from that perspective, I would have written it in a completely different way.
I see.
Mhm.
Thank you. Well, AI is being included in some professional spheres. In your experience, how is it has it affected to journalism?
Oh, yeah. So there's a huge impact on AI in journalism and obviously many other fields. Um, I think, well, one thing that I learned recently that we talked about in class is that actually up to about 30% of articles are now written by through or using AI technology rather
Yeah.
than journalists. So one of the main, I guess, ways that we can feel the impact of AI is that journalists are sort of becoming unnecessary for certain types of articles. If it's an article that's dealing with a lot of data, with a lot of numbers, then you can actually put that information right into an automated program that will then pump out a report, and no journalist has to write it or even look at it. And sometimes what they do is have the AI software write the article and then have an editor double check it to make sure that it's okay or that there's no grammatical errors. But basically, I mean, I think with any industry, people who work in that industry are afraid of being replaced by robots, I guess.
Yeah.
And then generally, I think too, I mean, there is something that is quite personal about journalism, about writing a news article, and about talking to sources that is lost when it's just a computer, rearranging information that's been sort of submitted to it. So I think that's one really big way that journalism is going to be changed by AI. I think there can be some benefits as well. I think that there's AI software that you can use to compile a lot of information about a particular topic, and then you as the journalist can go through it and use it to write your article. So it can make your work easier, but it can also, sort of fundamentally change your work by replacing the human aspect.
I see. Thank you. You started work as a professor at Webster University in 2018, and now it's almost like 5 years, right? And could you tell me the difference between you starting a job as a new employee and now? What has changed a lot? Did your teaching methods improve?
Yes, I definitely think my teaching methods improved. I'm really happy to say. I think when I first came to Webster, I had just taught for about 2 years as a graduate student. And so I really didn't know everything that I was in store for. As a graduate student, I was a TA, so I wasn't even in charge of teaching the class. For one of the classes, I just helped, administrate and take role and things like that. And then when I finally did have my own class, I did have my own class, 2 of my own classes. I think it was fun. I remember enjoying the students, but it's nothing like having it be your full-time job, and then you have, instead of one class per semester for 2 semesters, you have 3 classes per semester for indefinitely, or more. There's been some years that I've actually taught 4 classes, just because of the way that we may have needed someone to cover a class or something like that. And so it definitely was a challenge to manage that many classes at first. It was a challenge to, I think the biggest thing that I had to learn was what the students here need. So being able to say, okay, well, I have this planned for today, but my students are not really responding that well to the material, or it seems like they haven't finished their homework, whatever it might be. So what should I do? Should I just keep plowing through and keep talking even though nobody is listening? Should I yell at them because they didn't do their homework? What do I do? And so I think that really was a process of learning. And now I feel like, because it has been 5 years, I can anticipate a lot better. And so I can say, okay, well, usually we have 16 weeks of a semester. About week 8, everybody starts being really tired, and so what should I do? Should I make sure that I have a flexible deadline for some assignments, so if you get behind, then you can catch up without getting lost? Or should we have a break, right? Should we have like a movie day halfway through the semester? So whatever, so stuff like that, just to sort of realize that, my students are human beings. Sometimes life gets in the way. And so how can I be accommodating? And basically the goal is really that we both, or me and my students, all of us, I guess, get what we want to get out of it. We want to learn some stuff. We don't want to be under a lot of stress. We want to improve our skills. It's not really that important that everything goes exactly to plan
Yeah.
all the time. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, I think, has been probably the biggest lesson. I think, too, during COVID, I learned a lot because I realized, one of my really good friends who also works at Webster said, just have some compassion. Right now everything is really, really new. So if someone didn't turn in their homework, who cares, right?
Yeah.
It's COVID. Like, we don't even know what's going on. We don't know if we're going to live or die. Who cares about your homework?
See.
So, not that you don't have to turn in anything and you can get an A, but be understanding and meet people where they are. And so I think I really learned a lot from those experiences. And I think it made me a better professor.
I see. That's great. It depends on the schedule and it depends on the understanding.
Yeah.
Well, well, we will continue on this topic. Various types of major students participate in your class. How would you attract those students to your class?
Well, I think depending on the class, so like I'm teaching a class right now that's about international communication, and so that class is sort of designed to appeal to a lot of different people. It's sort of like a general class, right? So it's not super specific into one particular area or into one particular country or one particular type of communication. And so if you're interested in marketing or if you're interested in, I don't know, journalism, there's space for you there. And if you're not, a media person, you don't study in the School of Communication, then you might really just be taking the class because you thought it sounded interesting, not because you want to be a journalist or something like that. And so, like, this isn't a class where you're going to improve your writing skills, right? But it's a class that you might learn a lot about the field of journalism. And the same for the other topics that we cover. And so I think the way to attract students that are sort of outside of the major is really just to make a class that's more general. I don't think that like a business major wants to get into a class and then be, penalized because their stories are not written in news style when they don't want to be a journalist and they never planned on writing news articles, that's not what they came for. So those general classes that sort of just touch on things, have people, do assignments, but I'm not sitting there and saying, well, this isn't an AP style, so you get an F. And just sort of realizing that, again, in this situation, the goal is to learn something, and sort of making that an environment that everybody can participate in, regardless of what their major is.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. This is not a question, but my humble request.
Okay.
Could you give some advice to help the development of young students who study journalism major?
Okay, yeah. Definitely my best advice for a journalism student um, is read the news.
Yeah.
You have to read. You have to read the news. You have to pay attention to not just what's happening in the world, but you need to pay attention to the style of writing. When I was a journalism student, the most important thing that I learned was how to write in journalistic style. So there's a specific way of writing as a journalist that's, concise. You're trying to get the most information in the least amount of words. Space is a premium. We want to get the most important information at the top. We want to use sources that add credibility. Those things are really, really important. And part of the way that you get to learn how to do it is to observe other people who are doing that. And so I think it's very, very important to actually read the news, pay attention to what type of news is out there, and realize, how is this different? What are they doing? And how can I see what they're doing and improve my own skills? I think that's really, really important. Obviously, there's a lot of really important things that I think journalism students should know. There's an art and a skill to interviewing people, being able to listen to them and hear what they're saying and kind of, pivot if necessary, or ask follow-up questions. I think
Sure.
that's really important as well. So there's a lot of information that I really think that journalism students, they know, but they need to remember, those things. And I would always start with pay as much attention as possible to the news.
I
If you want to be
see.
a part of the news, you have to do that.
Sure.
Hmm.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah,
you for your spending time. I
of
really
course.
appreciate.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for your watching. Like and subscribe.